So, when it comes to doing our job, fundamentally, all of us are doing the same thing. We are trying to bring the value in a highly competitive and a dynamic environment, right? And one of the reasons why software engineering is such a good job because it's really a complex job, right? If you want to be a software engineer, the barrier of entry is very high. You need to have a certain degree of aptitude. You must have learned it for at least 2 or 3 years to be productive, and it's keep changing, right? So because the job is complex, there's a less competition, and because there's a lot of demand, it is really well paid job, right? And if you compare the software engineering with any other profession, for example, yoga teaching, right? If you compare the software engineering with yoga teaching, you will notice the barrier of entry in the yoga teaching is very low, right? I can become a yoga teacher in a month. The dynamism is less, right? It doesn't keep changing like the software engineering, right? You have a fixed amount of pose and you just need to learn them, right? Competition obviously become higher in this case, right? Obviously there's a different requirement in there, but if you compare in high level, software engineering will always be or will be more well paid compared to yoga teacher training because of the forces of nature, forces of market, right? But things with AI are changing now, right? The barrier of entries are going low, and this is changing the complete dynamic, right? So if the software engineering becomes less complex of a job, you can expect that your compensation will also become less over the period of time, right? So with the AI, understanding like think it's changing a lot of things, especially as a software engineer, what kind of opportunity now unlocks, right? I mean, that's generally what I was thinking to build a video about, right? So, interestingly, the low barrier of entry is going down in pretty much every single profession, right? And pretty much on every single level. So, what is happening now? Before, let's say the full stack engineering was a complex job, right? At this point, a relatively less someone who doesn't really have done a lot of software engineering, if that person is willing to hustle with the different tools at this point, can build at least a basic CRUD application without knowing the software engineering, right? So for that person, the barrier of entry to software engineering is becoming lower, right? At the same time, if you are a software engineer and let's say you are somebody who was writing the React component or APIs and building a full stack application, the barrier of entry to build more complex tools, for example, libraries or more sophisticated systems like LinkedIn, where they need to handle millions of messages per hour or per day, is becoming more accessible because the barrier of entry to do these jobs are becoming lower, right? So somebody who was doing a full stack engineering job now can attempt these things. Somebody who's doing this sort of job can now attempt even more complex job, building an operating system. So everybody can level up at least one level at this point because of AI, because it just lowers the barrier of entry. So one thing that unlocks, in my opinion, is this: you can do more complex things than you were doing before because of AI. And that's an opportunity, right? For somebody who has no coding experience or who's working with no code or low code sort of tools, it's very hard for that person, if not impossible, to build a library, right? But person who is building a full stack engineering, it is more practical now, right? So if you want to stay at the same level of complexity, you need to upgrade yourself at least one level up at this point, right? So that's one point. The second point is, because of AI, if you're working as a software engineer, it can potentially 10x your output if you understand what you're doing, right? So what is happening now is something that is being done by 10 people can potentially be done by 2 people team now, right? Whatever was being done by 100 people team can potentially be done by 10 people team. So there's likely a disruption is happening on the efficiency level, right? So whatever is happening 10 people team is doing at this point, whatever kind of product they're building, can actually potentially be built by just one or two people team, right? So the another opportunity that unlocks at this level is that you can, as an independent software engineer, can potentially start building tools or potentially start building businesses which were being done by almost 10 people's team, right? And because of the efficiency gain and because of lower cost, you can potentially win that market, right? So that is another level of unlock that is happening at this point. And finally, because of AI, what is happening is like the scope of softwares are increasing. And it may be a little bit more subjective because also because of AI, certain kind of software is no longer needed, but different profession, for example, lawyer, right? It is becoming a software engineering problem than a person, right? So lawyer or marketing or all these things, it is becoming more like a software engineering challenges that people are solving now, building an agent that acts as a lawyer, for example, right? So the scope of what you are doing as a software engineer or the total scope of softwares are also expanding at some level, right? So that also opens up certain opportunities, that unlocks certain opportunities, right? So in my opinion, these are the three clear opportunities, right? You can level up in terms of complexity, the job of complexity that you are doing as a software engineer, to stay at the same level of complexity that you are doing now, and that will have like a same market impact, right? You can start moving more like horizontally and start building the products altogether, right? Instead of acting as a one component in the team, right? Or you can take advantage of the places where the softwares are not there yet, but they are going to become, right? So that is something that comes to my mind when I think of like what are the new opportunity opens up as a software engineer in this age of AI. But one thing is pretty clear, right? AI is bringing sort of a fundamental change across everything, right? It's not just the software engineering. Any profession at this point, the barrier of entries are going way down, right? And especially the entry level jobs are pretty much being automated, right? Same thing happening in the companies, right? Is like software engineering is not really expanding as a job, but in fact, it is more like a shrinking in terms of jobs. So you have to be prepared, especially when you have your job right now. You have to be really prepared for what are you going to, how are you going to navigate this thing, right? Otherwise, as we see for most of the layoffs and all these things, if the environment changes drastically, it's not like anybody gives a shit about you, right? So, in my opinion, at least at this point, the very least thing that we should be doing as a software engineer is to level up the complexity, to stay in the same layer of complexity that we are currently working on, or at least start building your own products, right? So that's what it comes to my mind when I think about like what are the new opportunities comes in terms of the software engineering. And hopefully I see you in the next video.